My name is Sahas, and I'll be your instructor for today. And our other instructor, Scott, will be in charge of running the presentations and demonstrating all of the code. Scott, would you like to say hi?
Hi, I'm a second year comp sci major and the computer vision lead of UCR UAS, and glad to be typing for you today.
All right, thank you very much, Scott. And my name is Sahas once again, and I am a second year computer science lead who is the computer science lead for. I'm a computer science major, my bad, and I'm a computer science lead for IEEE UAS. All right, let's get started then. So the first thing we want to talk about for our Python workshop is that we will be having some practice problems for you guys to do. We have all of our practice problems available on the GitHub link that is available on the slide as well as in the comments of the slide. So let's go ahead and walk through how we can get that installed. So we first go ahead and click on the link and we will be brought to a GitHub page for Python for the Python workshop, and included will be some included files that will be used for the practice problems as well as 4 different practice problems. Session 1 will just be inside of this practice1.py, and other future lessons that we do will have according practice problems for them for practice 2, 3, and 4. So in order to get this installed onto our computer, we first need to click on the green code button, and we want to do download zip. Once the zip is properly installed onto our computer, we would want to open up our file management or however we view our files and unzip the file.
Yeah. So here the process should be fairly similar to between Mac and Windows. So in Windows, all you have to do is double click on this this folder, and that'll give you your main practice problems folder. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna drag this anywhere that you want. So I'm gonna choose where I want to put it. Go ahead and choose wherever you'd like. And on Mac, you just double click it and it'll make a copy of the folder right below it.
All right, and then once we have that in a folder that we can quickly access, we're gonna open up Visual Studio's code, or VS Code. And then we're going to add this into our workspace by first going into the Files tab at the top right or top left, and we're going to add folder to workspace. So then we're going to go ahead and click that, and we find where we put the practice problems, and then we're going to add that into our workspace. And then it'll take some time and hopefully it'll pop up onto the workspace. Right there. And right now it's under the untitled workspace, and you'll see that it's being stored in the UCR-US Python workshop file, and included are a cars.csv file, a dog JPEG file, and 4 practice problems. So for now, we're going to quickly open up practice problem 1, and we're going to show you how to essentially do the practice problems. So every practice problem will always have a practice. Before we continue, are there any questions so far in terms of getting this files from GitHub onto the Visual Studio's code? If not, then we can continue. How can we download it again? So in order to download it, there is first a link on the PowerPoint, and that will take you to a GitHub page. From there, you can just click a green code button, and it'll create a drop down for download zip. You want to go ahead and click download zip, and that will install a zip file onto your computer. And then once you finish doing that, you can just unzip it or remove it from the zip file, and then save it in a place where it's easily accessible, and then path that into your VS Code. Any other questions? If not, I guess we can keep going. So, so every single practice problem will always have a problem zero, a problem zero start, and a problem zero end, and inside will be a simple print hello world function. So in order to run that, what we'll need to do is we're going to highlight from starting from problem zero and then go all the way down to problem zero end, and then we want to on Windows we'd want to do Control slash, and then on Macs, we would want to do command slash, and that will uncomment out the code. This will basically make it so that it's much more easy, so it's easier for you to select different problems you're working on and write code for them. Yeah, so when you see the colors show up for the code, that means that it's uncommented and it can now be executed. So when we hit the green triangle at the top right, this should make it so that we can run the program and see print hello world. Any questions on getting the practice problems to run? All right, let's. Every single, or for most of our lessons, we'll be having a practice problem section that you guys can follow. So for this session, we have, I believe, 4 to 5 different problems for you guys to do. 4 problems, and they can range from relatively easy problems to, I believe, each one might have 1 or 2 challenge problems. Yeah. So, and we'll be holding office hours, and at the end of the week, meaning for the next session, we'll have solutions for this current practice problem.
Yeah. And one more thing to add, after
Mhm.
you finish each problem, so let's say I finish problem 0 and I get the same output that I expect, then it'll be helpful if you just re-comment that out by doing the exact same thing. So highlight and press Control or Command and then /. Yep.
All right. So now that we've discussed our practice problems, we can now move on to the actual coding section for the workshop. So so the first thing we want to talk about is we know some of you might have some experience in C++ because at UCR primarily everything is taught in C++. So some of the basic comparisons between C++ and Python is in Python everything is based on white space as opposed to semicolons. So in C++ and Java, you've probably ended every single line of code with a semicolon, but in Python, instead, everything is based on white spacing. So if we were, right now we're creating a new file to demonstrate this. So in this case, when we have a print statement, we would want it ended with absolutely nothing. It's just a new line essentially indicates that we're going on to the next line of the code. But in C++, we would have to have a semicolon at the end to tell that this line of code is separate from another line of code. And this has its advantages and disadvantages. Advantages being it's easier to read. The disadvantage being it sometimes gets a bit weird with how you have to space everything out. And some other differences I'll quickly run through are import is used in it's used I believe in Python as opposed to include, or no wait, it's the other way around, right? It's include in Python, import in C++. We use colons in Python. We use curly brackets in C++. We use scripts in Python, and we use int main in C++. But you can also achieve the same thing by using if name equals main. And then in Python, let's go ahead and demonstrate that. So int.main essentially can be demonstrated by using if name equals main. It essentially acts as our main file. Right. And then we also have so Python is also interpreted as opposed to compiled, which means it'll run line by line instead of compiling all of the code all together and then creating an executable file based on that. And Python is designed to be much more easier to use, while C++ is supposed to be much faster to write or to create programs that run much, much faster. And then commenting, which is a super important feature in programming, is in Python it's done by the hash symbol, while in C++ it's done by double slash. And earlier when we were showing examples of how to uncomment or comment out code in Python from the practice examples, it's control slash for Windows and command slash for Mac. So if you highlight multiple texts, you can also quickly comment things out or uncomment it. All right. Now that we know the comparisons, we can start to code in Python. So the first program that we always, or the first function we always try to run is the print hello world, but we've done that many times, so we can go ahead and skip that. One thing that we want to mention is that the quotation marks, single quotes versus double quotes, are the same thing as long as you don't mix them together. So if you were to use single quotes, it works just as well as if you were to use double quotes. Now, there are 4 important data types that we want to talk about when using Python. The 4 being integers, which are numbers that do not use decimal points; floats, which are numbers that do use decimal points; booleans, which are just true or false, which can also be denoted as a 1 for true or a 0 for false; strings, and the final being strings, which are essentially just words or strings of characters. So we can quickly show you how they look when we put them inside of variables, which we'll talk about in a bit. So we have an integer variable that is set to 5, so that would be stored as an integer, and then we can have a float stored as negative 4.423. So you can notice that integers and floats can also be negative or positive. A boolean, which is a true or false statement, and note that when you store a boolean variable, the T has to be capitalized in true, and the F in false has to also be capitalized. And in terms of strings, you've already seen this before in Hello World. You can just put them in quotation marks as single quotes or double quotes. Kenneth has a question: are integers are they only whole positive number? Integers would be positive or negative numbers, same as floating numbers, which can be negative decimal point numbers or positive decimal point numbers. Okay, so what Scott was using earlier to store these these data types were called variables. Oh, Ro has a quick question. No doubles. We only use floats, I believe, in Python. So no doubles. That I believe is a C++ thing. Okay, so what Scott was using earlier in order to store our integers, floats, strings, and integers, floats, booleans, and doubles were called variables. And in order to, so let's say, for example, we want to constantly type out this phrase hello world for whatever reason. Instead of typing the word hello world over and over again and printing it, we can instead store that into a easier to manage variable that essentially stores the data type of string. So let's go ahead and go back into our Visual Studios, and we're going to go ahead and create a new variable called A, and it'll store a string called hello world. So then instead of having to print out hello world inside of quotation marks, we're instead going to print out the variable A, which is essentially stored within itself, and you wouldn't have to put the letter A inside of quotation marks. If you were to put them inside of quotation marks, however, it would just print out the letter A as opposed to storing the variable and returning that. Yeah, so just as Scott demonstrated right now, when you do print A without the quotation marks, it'll print out whatever that variable is storing. And this is really important to keep in mind, because if you try to print out a string without the quotation marks around it, it'll instead try to find a variable with that name. And if that variable cannot be found, then you'll probably get an error. Yep, so if the variable is not defined, then you will get an error and the program will cease to work. How do you get the little green run button? All right, so in Python or in VS Code, we need to go to extensions. And one of the extensions that we're using is the Python extension by Microsoft. And that essentially allows us to get the green triangle to be able to run the program. So you want to just go ahead and install that. Yep. All right. So some important rules about variables are we use the single equal sign as an assignment operator. So anything to the left of the equal sign is the variable, and the right of the equal sign is what we're assigning to that variable. And another thing to mention is there are some specific rules when it comes to labeling our variables. So let's go back to VS Code. So when you create the name of a variable, there's some rules that we need to follow because you cannot start a variable name with an integer or a special character. And you cannot have any special characters like exclamation marks or ampersands or anything of the such as part of the variable name. So all of these variables, except for the very first one, will give you an error. And oftentimes it'll just point you to where that error might be in terms of creating the variable. The other thing we need to keep in mind is you cannot switch the positions of where the variable is when you're assigning it something. So in this case, if this Python will think you're trying to assign the letter A or the variable A in this case to 12, which is not possible because you cannot assign something in an integer another value. Are there any questions regarding variables or data types that we just went over? If not, we can keep moving on to the next part of the slides, which is I/O streams. So I/O, or input and output, are ways in order for us to interact with the terminal. Scott can really quickly go back to VS Code and show us where the terminal is. So the terminal might be at the bottom or to the left of your VS Code. And this is where lots of ways are, these are basically ways you can enable a program to interact with the outside world and as well as internally inside of the program. So you can do stuff like put variables into the code, and it can process that information and then spit out that a new piece of information that you wanted from any kind of algorithm that you just ran earlier. So one example, so how you run an input is you always want to assign that input to a variable. So in this case, we'll have a variable called user input, and we're assigning it an input from the user. And inside of our parentheses, we're going to give them a prompt for what we want them to enter. So right now, we're going to prompt to the user, please enter your name, and whatever they input into the terminal will get inputted or will get stored inside of user input. And then we can take that variable and spit it out through a print statement back to the terminal. And then we can just input our name and it'll return, and we'll use that as the print statement when the variable user input is called. Cool. And we'll discuss what the plus symbol did in a later slide, but what Scott did was he has a string called welcome, and he's attaching another string from user input to that, which is called string concatenation. But we'll discuss that in a future slide. Well, actually, we'll be talking about it in this slide, but we're going to be talking about data type interactions. So with integers and float, we can do basic arithmetic statements such as plus, minus, multiplication, division. Multiplication, division denoted using an asterisk for multiplication and a single slash for division. There are also three other special ones that we can use in Python, which are double asterisks in order to denote a power. We can use a double slash to denote a division, but we round down. And then we use a percent sign for modulo, which essentially means after you do a division, we just print out the remainder. There's a typo on line 8. Oh, yes, on line 8, for power, it would be a double asterisk as opposed to a single asterisk. We cannot use the caret symbol for exponents. Only the double asterisk would work. All right, so now we can try and use these as an example. So we're going to create a variable A and store an integer in it. And we'll create another for B. and we're going to create a third variable that will store the product or the division or whatever arithmetic equation we do for this. So we can start with 12 times, or yeah, we would want to use the variable name that we created, and then we can go ahead and print them out. So what's something important to note in Python, since all variables can always store any kind of data type, you can always reassign it a new type of data type. So for example, A is currently storing an integer. A in the future can also store a float or a double, sorry, not a double, a float or a Boolean or a string. It can always be reassigned to any other kind of data type. So let's go ahead and print out these solutions and see what happens. So for when we do C equals A times B, we'll get that solution. And then for A divided by B, we'll get that solution. And for the power, we get, of course, a relatively large number, which makes sense. And we can also demonstrate what the modulo does, just so that you guys can see that it essentially just prints out the remainder as opposed to the actual division between two numbers. And these would only work on integers. So if we did 12 modulo 5, this will give us the remainder, which is just 2, because you can only divide 5 into 12 2 times, and then you will have a remainder of 2. All right. The next thing that we want to talk about are Boolean true and false. So if we want to compare two values, so this could be two different variables, two different integers, or integers in general, or an integer versus another variable, we would want to use the double equal sign as a comparison. So the general rule of thumb would be a single equal sign for assignment and double equal sign for comparison. So we can go ahead and demonstrate that on VS Code. So we'll have variable A still storing integer 12 and variable B storing integer 5. And if we were to compare these two, since A is not equal to B, this will produce a false statement when ran. And if they were storing the same variable, or in this, yeah, if we were storing the same variable or the same integer in both variables, so 12 is equal to 12, so this will produce true. And we can also compare against hard-coded numbers, so we can compare A to 12, and that will produce a true statement as well. And you can also just hard-code 12 is 12 equal to 12, but that wouldn't really be any practical sense. All right. And then the last thing we want to talk about for data type interactions are what we can do with strings. So with strings, we want to store a string into a variable first, and we can apply dot operators onto that, which can essentially connect to their attributes and also other methods or functions that can adjust that specific variable that's storing the string. But one weird thing with Python is not every single type of attribute can be changed using a dot operator. One example being the length function. So we're going to be discussing how the length upper and lower function works. So length will take inside of its parentheses a string being stored inside of a variable, and will produce a number that would be equivalent to the length of that string. So if we did length of the string, then it'll print out how many characters that are in high there with an exclamation mark. And notice how we have the space also counts as one of the characters. And another important thing to talk about is with strings, the very first letter, H in this case, is actually being stored at something called index 0. Index meant being the position at where that specific letter can be found. So all indexing will start at 0. So H will be at index 0, I index 1, space at index 2, and so on and so forth. So we can quickly talk about how we can specifically find specific letters inside of a string of words. So if we did string square brackets denoting we want to search for a particular thing inside of the string, and then the index number, we will print out the position of, we'll print out the letter being stored at position 3. So that would be the letter T in this case, as opposed to, so you want to make sure you don't count H as number one, because then you would be mistaken and you would expect it to print out a space as opposed to the letter T. And then if you try to index using the size, then you're going to get an out of range error, because the very last character in a string would always be length -1. Oh, Allison had a quick question. Will it always print true or false, or can I print out 1 or 2? With Booleans, it'll print out true or false, because 1 and 2 are also considered integers, so it would prioritize 1 and 2 for integers. Mm-hmm. But you can do something called casting, which we will talk about later. But what Scott just did is he's taking a true statement or a false statement and converting it into an integer. All right, so we still want to quickly talk about upper and lower, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about indexing later, because I accidentally kind of briefly skimmed over it. Oh, Kenneth has a question. For print string 1, will 1 be surrounded by the brackets, or do the parentheses work? In order to print out specific letters, you always want to use the square brackets. The square brackets denote that we're talking about so in order to mention this, we want to quickly talk about how strings are actually being stored. You would expect them to just be storing the word as a whole object, but instead what's happening is they're actually being broken down into a list of individual letters. So this is so Scott is quickly showing us how it looks internally in the computer. So we would need to use the square brackets to say that we are talking about a specific letter in this specific array that is high there. And the strings have to be stored as variables before printing. Strings, yeah, we would have to put it into a variable, and then we use the square brackets on that variable. You can't just do it on the literal string. All right. And now we're going to quickly cover upper and lower. So how we run upper and lower is we would want to first use the variable of the string. And thank you, Scott. And we're going to call the name of the string, and we're going to do dot upper, and this will convert all of the letters into an uppercase, and this will basically ignore any letters that are already uppercase. And then for dot lower, it does the exact opposite, where it'll take any letter that is uppercase and convert it to lowercase. So these are usually used whenever you have a user input and it's an inconsistent uppercase and lowercase. You can default it to lower or upper to make it easier to compare against other variables. Another thing we want to talk about is called concatenations of strings, which is what Scott did earlier when he was combining a string with a variable. So concatenations is essentially you're taking two strings and gluing them together using a plus sign. So we're going to create, are these meetings not only on Mondays? We're having this meeting on Saturday because Monday is a UCR holiday, or it's also Martin Luther King holiday, I believe. But yeah, we'll always check the website to see when the next meeting is going to be, though. All right, so in this example, we have three variables. One variable called hi, and okay, this is the UCR. That's not what I meant. Never mind. But we have a variable called hi equals hello, and then we have another variable space that just takes in a blank space, and then we have a third variable called world, which just has world exclamation mark. And what we can do is we can combine them using plus signs, and this will combine to create one sentence essentially. We kind of rushed how the concatenation works. Does anyone have any questions regarding what just happened? And any questions about concatenation? Mine says combination is not defined. You want to make sure you are first creating the variable combination and assigning it the appropriate variables, and then make sure you're also using the same name when you print it out. do you have to include any empty brackets inside when converting upper to lower? So do you mean do you need to have upper and then the parentheses afterwards? Is that what is that the question? Yeah, so lower and upper are called functions, also known as methods, and every function method requires a parentheses at the very end. And these are this basically allows that function to take in any kind of input for its parameters. So for example, for the print statement, which is also a function, there's some parentheses, and anything you put into that parentheses is inputted into that function, and some kind of cool Python magic happens, and it prints that to the terminal. Between characters and strings. So, how does Python know the difference between characters and strings? I believe in Python, everything is being stored as essentially a string. So you have to write string each time. Oh, another cool thing to mention in Python, whenever you assign a variable or create a new variable, you never have to specify what kind of data type that variable has to store. That every variable can store any kind of data type and always can switch in between without require any kind of casting. So if you have a variable that was storing a string, you can immediately convert that variable to store an integer afterwards, which is super convenient because you don't need to create a brand new variable that has a different kind of data type.
Yeah, so when I tried copying this code, I get an unexpected token in my folder file, an expression statement plus category info. So I don't know what's wrong with that.
Are you trying to copy the code from what you see right now?
Yeah. Without the a equals, I was just trying to print hello world.
Oh, is print hello world by itself not working?
It was working before.
Maybe during the office hours, would you like to hop in and we can quickly take a look at it with you?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Thank you.
So, let's see. So now we can demonstrate that concatenation also works between with strings, literals, as well as variables, and you can essentially combine them together. And an important thing to note is you cannot attach a integer or a float to a string because you can't combine different types of data types. You would have to actually cast that into a string, and that's done by using the string str function, and you input a variable into that and convert any integers inside of it into a string, and then you can glue them together. And then if you print out answer, it'll now be able to print out the integer as well because we converted it into a string. All right. The last thing we want to talk about with strings are escape characters. So escape characters are special characters that we use in order to kind of manipulate the string itself. And the main ones are /n for creating a new line. Sorry, what is that? /n is for a new line. /s is for space. /t is for tabs, and because strings are done by using quotation marks, if you try to include a quotation marks inside of a string, you might find yourself having an error. Instead, you would actually need to do quotation marks in order to be able to put a quotation mark into your string, which sounds a bit confusing right now, but if we can quickly demonstrate what that looks like, we can create a new print statement. And you would want to just do a / and the quotation mark, and you'll be able to now print out the quotation. Just like that. And if you didn't include the /, so let's quickly illuminate that /, Scott. We should most likely have an error because we have more quotation marks than Python knows what to do with them. So always have the / enabled for that. And then we can quickly show you what /n, /s does. /t is used for tabbing, /s is for... /s is apparently not a command.
Yeah, scratch that slash backslash x.
All right, so the main stuff we need to talk, and we just need to mention are backslash n for new lines, backslash quotation marks, backslash, because since the backslash is a escape character, you can't use a regular slash. So in order to put a slash, you just need to do double slash, just like that, and then backslash t for tab. Any questions regarding escape characters or concatenations or anything that we just covered?
I have a quick question. So I remember you guys talked about indexing, right?
Oh, right, yes.
What if I want to print, like, say, hello world, I want to print the index number of 5, 6, and 7 all on the same line.
I got you, Peng-Chi. Yeah, we can definitely show you that. So we're going to quickly store hello there inside of a variable called a, and then we're going to have Scott quickly show us what all of the indexing for that would look like. And if you want to just print out the word hello, or if you want to just print out the word LLO in hello, for example, what we want to do is we want to first print out or we want to mention the variable and then the square brackets, and then we want to first find the starting letter. The starting letter for LLO would be at 2, my bad. So we're going to start at 2. And then if we want to extend it from there, we actually want to use a colon. And then we find out where the LLO ends. So we're going to keep counting L, O, and then if we stop at 4, what would happen is we would actually just print out LL, because what's going on is Python is going to start at index 2 and go all the way to 4, but not include 4. So if we want to include the O, we just want to do one more than what we would have expected. So we just want to do 5 instead, and we'll get LLO. And another cool thing we can do using this technique is if we want to print out all of hello, we can actually just eliminate the stuff on the left side of the colon, and that would basically say that we're starting at the very beginning of the string, and then we can just tell it where to stop. In this case, we want to make it stop at 5. So what this will print out is this will print out hello, because we start at index 0 and we go all the way to 5, and then we stop.
Awesome. How do we do, so I want to say LLO and then print a E in the there. Is there a way?
In order to do that, we would need to print them in separate print statements, I believe.
Okay. Cool.
Or you can concatenate them together using the plus sign.
Okay, that's cool.
And another thing we can do is, just like how you can leave the left side of the colon blank, you can actually leave the right side of the colon blank, and what we can do is we can have a starting index position and then print all the way to the very end of the string. So if we start at index 6, we just print out the word there.
If you just put like a colon by itself, does it print out the whole thing?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I actually did not know that until we just tested it. All right. Well, that's everything in terms of strings. Are there any questions?
Yeah. So the backslash or like the slash n slash s, do these, so like they take your operator and turn it into like a character?
Yeah, essentially, it's an escape character in order for us to essentially print out that specific character that couldn't be previously printed.
Oh, okay.
Because if you just had a regular slash, it would think that you're about to do another escape character. If you can't identify the escape character, it'll just probably not work.
Okay. Do you have anywhere that like kind of defines what like dash n, slash n slash s, all of that?
Like a library for all of them?
Yeah, or like at least what each one does.
Oh yeah. I guess we can update the slides to show you what everything does at a later point.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the last topic that we want to talk about today are data structures, which are basically different ways to store all the previously mentioned data types in a way that basically makes it easier for us to access. The cool thing about Python's data structures, unlike C++ or Java, is they are able to store multiple of different types of data. So we can have a list, which is one of the most basic type of data structures, which works not any different than in real life list. We can have it store integers, floats, Boolean variables, and strings all at the same time, which sometimes might not sound super practical, but you can definitely do it. And how we create a list is we first have the variable assigning it, and we'll use square brackets to denote that this is a list. And then we separate each variable or each data type with a comma. So this will, so when we print out our list that stores 5, 2, the integers, and then a string Scott, and then a Boolean value of true, it'll print all of those out into the terminal. And then similar to how we mentioned the indexing for strings, the same principle applies to lists. So what we can do is we can do A and then the square brackets. And then if we want to just print out Scott, then we would want to use index 2 and that'll print out Scott. Or if we want to print out number 2, or we can always also concatenate more stuff to this. Since Scott is a string, we can glue another additional string on top of that and produce Scott is super cool, which is untrue. I'm just kidding. It's totally true, which is why the next statement is true. So if we try doing print and then use this, we can also go ahead and do print true. And then the colon technique also works where you can print out multiple sections of our list. So if we did starting at 1 and extend it to the end, we'll just print out 2.
Sorry, typo.
We probably forgot the square brackets. I just got an error return where
Don't be like Scott,
I tried to
kids.
say Scott is cool. Oh. All right, and then the same principle applies for strings where you can start at 1, the index 1, and then print all the way to the end, or you can print out just item 1 and 2 if you just did 1:2 or 3, right? Because you have to mention that it'll stop at wherever we tell it to stop. And yeah, and we can also use the length function for lists, so it's similar to strings. You can start to see that the similarities between lists and strings are very similar because strings are essentially storing the characters as a list. So if we did the length, it'll produce how many items we can find in that specific list. The indexing might be complicated for new programmers. Right, so index will always start at 0 as opposed to 1. So 5 is at index 0, 2 is at index 1, so on and so forth. And so always keep in mind that the very last variable, or the very last data type in a list will be 1 less than the size of the list. So since we have a list of size 4, the very last data type is stored at index 3. The very last data type that we want to talk about are dictionaries, which work very similar to lists and also very similar to dictionaries in real life, where we actually have a key, and the key will be storing a value of any kind of data type of our choosing. So, and unlike a dictionary in real life, dictionaries in Python are actually unordered unless you design them to be ordered. So let's quickly go ahead and show you how to create a dictionary in Python. So we're going to create a simple grocery list, and that is going to store a bunch of strings of different types of fruits, and we will assign them a number as their price. And notice how in the structure of our dictionary, we use curly brackets to say that this is a dictionary, and then we use colons. Anything to the left of the colon is the key, and anything to the right of the colon is the value being stored at that key. So we have a key of banana that costs 25 cents, a key for apples, which is 40 cents, a key for Scott that's worth a lot of money, And we have a key for Sahas that's a lot of money -1, and then an iPhone, which is $950. So then in order to get the value of, let's say, bananas, we just do grocery list in the square brackets, and then inside we put the name of the variable. Sorry, we put the name of the key, and notice how we have to have it as a string, as opposed, if we didn't have the string, then it would try to find a variable called bananas. And then if we were to print this, it'll print out the price of bananas, which is 25. And if you wanted to add additional items to grocery list, you would just need to do, print or write the variable name, and then square brackets afterwards. And then inside of the square bracket, we create a new key, and then we assign that a new data type. So then when we print out grocery list for a second time, and also we can print out grocery list just like that without having to mention any of the keys, then it'll also add at the very end laptops that cost $1,200. Any questions regarding dictionary?
So when you have the grocery list with the laptop, it just amends the grocery list function. Is that a variable? So it just amends that variable or updates it.
Yeah, we're essentially just adding a brand new key with a brand new variable to the very end of the of our dictionary called or that's being stored in grocery list.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. There's no set size for lists. No, so we can just continue adding more stuff into a list or adding more stuff into a dictionary. It's really nice compared to C++ where we have to create a predetermined size for our list or array. But in Python, we can constantly add more and more stuff to it.
Is there a keyboard shortcut to run the script?
I believe it might be F6. If I'm not mistaken, F6 or F7, it's mentioned somewhere in the installation for, or run with that. Oh,
okay,
Control F5.
Okay.
I was off the mark completely.
And then also the other thing is that when you're typing like a line and then when like let's say you put like a parentheses or a quotation and it autofills the back, how do you like skip to behind that autofill?
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Like if I'm typing, let's say like a parentheses and like a quotation,
mm-hmm.
and then it automatically creates like the last parentheses and quotation. How do I move the cursor to after that quotation? Do I just have to hit the arrow?
Yeah, you can just use the arrow keys.
Okay.
Or you can continue filling it in. So what you can do is you can do start the quotes and then end the quote. Oh.
Okay.
And then that should basically allow you to automatically get to the next. If you just do quote twice, it'll put you at the end of the quote.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so here I'm pressing single quote twice instead of single quote and arrow, and it does the same thing. Yeah, good question.
If there are no other questions, we actually reached the end of today's session. The last thing we were talking about being data structures. So that's about it for this session.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And we do have a couple of words from our club administration. So, yeah, I think Pengshi is going to talk about the club a little bit.
I'm actually gonna take over.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Hi. So I'm from the business team of UCR UAS, and I'd like to just introduce our club, the organizers of this workshop, this series of workshops. So before we begin, any last questions about the code? We don't want to leave you hanging. If not, yeah, okay. If not, then Unmanned Aerial Systems is us. It's a group of multidisciplinary students who are passionate about unmanned aerial systems, working together to build autonomous flight vehicle solutions. We're a project under the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE, and American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME, chapters at our school. So basically, we work together to build planes, do workshops, and amongst other things. Yeah, some of the slides keep going. Okay. So a little housekeeping. We just want to plug in today to let you guys know that we are recruiting both the engineering department and the business department in our club are recruiting. So we need experienced mechanical engineers to build the plane for the UAV team. And we also need computer science people who should be very proficient with whatever we've been doing with Python to join the computer vision team with Scott. So the business team. So the business team, we need a financial and a marketing specialist. So we basically, the business team has been helping promote this event through emails. And we're also like hosting other big events and we need funding for that. So if you join, you'll be working alongside me and Peng Chi doing these cool things. So if you guys would like to apply, the links for the forms are in the notes for the slides. So feel free to check that out or ask Kenneth or Peng Chi with questions. So those are their emails. Nice, thank you. Club shirts, we have club uniforms. Even if you guys are not part of UCRUS, if you guys like a cool shirt with cool designs, feel free to fill out the order form. It's also in the speaker notes. And the deadline to order shirts are midnight tonight, and it will be cheaper the more people order it. Okay, so yeah, that is all. Contact us if you have any questions on social media or join our Slack to talk about Python and other things. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed.
As for the shirts, all of the tax and free shipping is applied to the price. It was around like $20 right now. So if you're interested and want to support our club, it'll be greatly appreciated. If you're interested in purchasing, contact either Train or I to purchase the shirt. Yeah. Back to you, Sahas.
All right. Thank you very much, Peng Chi. And that concludes the end of session 1 of our Python workshop. So thank you everyone for making it today. And we will be having office hours. So if you guys have any questions regarding what we just covered, be sure to stick by and we can answer any further questions. Thank you, everyone.